Good morning, friends. It's great to see you guys. Last week was a little crazy, and I was a little sad that I didn't get to see your faces. You might look around, and you might see some faces you're used to seeing missing. Between last week and this week, summer has arrived, right? I've been seeing pictures of people at Harry Potter World and Great Wolf Lodge and at softball tournament. So we know you are going to be here, there, and everywhere this summer, but we want to stay connected. Please check out that bulletin. You'll be getting a weekly email from me that'll tell you other ways that you can connect if you happen to miss out on a Sunday. I will tell you all, I don't know that you are quite going to get the same experience that the 9 o'clock crowd got today. It was an interesting experience. That's the only way I know how to explain it. I almost fell off the stage at one point. I'm going to try really hard not to do that. And then we have these cute little babies that are here during the service. They're both near a year old. And one's a little girl and one's a little boy. The little girl sits over here. The little boy sits over there. And there was a whole lot of flirting going on. So they were going back and forth. I'm I know no one is listening to me. And just when I thought that had calmed down, my son Sam was up here in the front doing interpretive dance. There's some scarves I'm going to use today, and he had found some extra ones, and he was using that to entertain everyone. So I'm so sorry you all missed all that. I will tell you, I used a lot of mental energy to get through that sermon as all of that was playing out. So I hope I have some left for you all today. We'll see. But it is the first Sunday in summer, as we would officially call it, in June. And we're starting a brand new sermon series called Red Letter Summer. Maybe when you were growing up, you found a Bible, you started flipping through it, and all you saw was all this black and white, very small print. And then all of a sudden you started seeing red letters, and you were like, what is that? I remember doing this as a kid and asking my parents, what's this all about? Why are these words in red and all the rest are in black and white? And they explained to me, these are the words of Jesus. And I just accepted that and moved on with life, right? So I was today years old when I finally asked the question, why though? When did we start doing this? And so I did a little bit of research, thank you Google, and I learned that this is a relatively new innovation. In 1899, there was a German immigrant to America. His name was Louis Klopsch. It's German. We're going to say that was correct pronunciation, all right? Y'all go with me there. And he was a newspaper editor. And as he would edit his newspaper every week, whenever he would have blank spaces in his columns, he would intersperse scripture references in there. And on one particular week, while he was working on an editorial, his eyes fell upon these words of Luke chapter 22:20. In this passage, Jesus says, "This cup, it's the New Testament in my blood, which I shed for you." And that sparked this thought in him, what if in the New Testament, where we have the words of Jesus, we started making his words red so that we would be able to see what they were, red like the blood that he shed. And he shared this with a few of his friends who were theologians. They thought it was a great idea. And soon enough, 60,000 red letter testaments were printed. They sold out very quickly. It became quite an international sensation, with accolades coming in from everyone from kings to the president of the United States, who actually hosted Klopsch at the White House while they were in power. So obviously it caught on, right? It's continued on, and we still have the red letters today. But what I found really interesting was the purpose underneath, why he did this. My skeptical husband, whenever I was starting to tell him this story, he jumped in. I think it was at Tacos and Theology, so others are my witnesses. He said, so that they could sell more Bibles, right? It was all a scheme to just make more money. But that's not what Klopsch says. He says this. He says, modern Christianity is striving zealously to draw nearer to the great founder of the faith. Setting aside mere human doctrines and theories regarding him, it presses close to the divine presence to gather from his own lips the definition of his mission to the world and his own revelation of the Father. The Red Letter Bible has been prepared and issued in the full conviction that it will meet the needs of the student, the worker, and the searchers after truth everywhere. And that's really the goal of this entire series, for us to hear directly from Jesus, from his own lips, who he says that he is, and how it is that he is at work in our world, so that we can draw near to him. You heard read earlier his words, the red letters from Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16. And I'm going to repeat to you just that very first line of that passage. But when I do that, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just notice what hearing those words stirs up inside of you. What's your instant reaction? Don't judge your instant reaction, okay? Don't try to think that there's a right or wrong answer here. Just simply notice what bubbles up, and hold on to that, okay? So are you ready? Here are those first words. You are the light of the world. Hear those words again. You are the light of the world. Maybe when you hear those words, the very first thing that happens for you is you're just like, yes, you feel empowered, right? You're like, Jesus said it, I believe it, put me on a stand so everyone can see me shine. That sounds like the right Sunday school, very spiritual response, right, in this situation. However, I would dare say that many of us, myself included, have some other very human reactions to hearing these red letter words of Jesus. Maybe you hear these words and honestly, you're kind of indifferent about it. You're like, okay, Jesus said we're the light of the world. All right, sounds good, but it really doesn't make much difference to my everyday life. Or maybe you hear those words and it's just like the total opposite. Instead of not really feeling anything, you feel everything. It makes you feel overwhelmed and anxious, and you kind of start to feel yourself get real nervous because you're like, that's a lot, Jesus. That's like a tall order to feel, and I don't know if I have enough time and energy or gifts or resources to really do what it is that you're asking from me. Or maybe, you hear these words, you are the light of the world, and it kind of makes you feel special, right? Like a little extraordinary. And you're like, oh, I like that. I am the light of the world. And you're kind of like, how do I kind of keep that for myself? Like, I have this light now, and I don't really want anybody else to have it, because what if they get the light and then they shine maybe a little bit brighter than I do? Or maybe you hear these words of Jesus and you feel defeated. You're just like, oh man, like I'm not good enough. I am not worthy enough. I am not perfect enough to be called light. I'm sorry, Jesus, but you got the wrong person here. Or maybe you hear those words of Jesus and you're kind of like, all right, Jesus, you've kind of gone off your rocker here, all right? Like, you might as well say to me, like, you are a dinosaur or you are a giant. Just because you say it doesn't make it so, right? So, again, there could be any number of other reactions. Those are just some that maybe I have struggled with at some point in my life that have made the list. But there's no need to feel guilty about feeling any of those things. Just notice it. Hold on to it, because here is my sneaking suspicion. My suspicion is that the people who were first gathered around Jesus when he said these words had these very same, very human reactions to these words that are now preserved for us in the red letters. And so we're going to go back. We're going to kind of put ourselves into the story, and we're going to allow ourselves to really hear what Jesus was saying to the crowd that first day and what he says to us today. So here's the context where Jesus spoke these words to this crowd and to us. Jesus was at the Sea of Galilee, pretty setting, right? And he was there with his disciples, and he saw this crowd of people coming near him. Fun fact, I took this picture. And I was really excited because this is the Mount of Beatitudes back there, and I wanted this great picture. But you see this guy on his little jet ski? He ruined all of my pictures, y'all. He was in every frame. But anyway, so this is a Mount of Beatitudes. I hope he had a good day. I hope it was fun. So Jesus is there with his disciples. He sees this crowd coming near him. And what Matthew then notes is that Jesus sits down, which might seem like a very unnecessary thing for Matthew to tell us, right? Unless, we know that this actually signified something important. Whenever a rabbi, a teacher, sat down, it meant that they were getting ready to teach their disciples, right? It was a posture that they took that told everyone, school is now in session. It is time to listen, right? So Jesus did that. He sat down, and his disciples and everyone else that was gathering around knew that it was time to really lean in and hear what Jesus was about to say to them. Now, when Jesus sat down, he sat down in a particular setting. He sat down on a mountain, is what Matthew tells us. This is what that mountain looks like today. And so, of course, like Jesus could have just chosen it because that's where he was, because it was clearly very beautiful. But there is a very practical reason why this was a great location as well. This slope is hollowed out. And with the water there at its base, it creates this natural amphitheater so that everyone who was coming near, not just his disciples who were closest to him, but the crowds of people would have been able to hear what Jesus was teaching to them. However, there was even a deeper, most likely, very symbolic reason why Matthew makes sure that we know that Jesus is standing not in a meadow somewhere, not inside a building, but on a mountain. You see, when God gave his people the law, he did so on a mountain through the prophet Moses. And now here is Jesus sitting down on this mountain, and he is telling the people that have gathered around that he has come to fulfill the law. And he begins to describe to them what it looks like to live in this new age that is dawning for God's people. It is drama at its highest and finest, right? It cannot be lost on us that Jesus is trying to make sure that they know that things are changing, that God is doing something new among them. Jesus had begun by describing that in this new day, that these people that we would have never guessed would have been included, let alone blessed, were indeed that they were the happy ones under his reign, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, the ones who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, those who are persecuted. As people are listening to this being the group of people that are blessed, that are happy in his kingdom, they had to find themselves a little off balance, right? Like, how is this possible? This is so opposite, so upside down from everything we had ever heard and known and experienced. And it's in that moment that they're already a little off balance that Jesus speaks these words to them. You are the light of the world. I want us to break this down just piece by piece together today. And so we're going to start with just that very first word, you. It's an important word. In our individualistic kind of culture that we live in, right? Like where we do it all on our own here in the 21st century, we read that you, we almost always automatically read you as singular, right? Like you are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. You are the light of the world, which makes it feel pretty heavy instantly, right? Like if it's just directly to you. In that moment, it's easy for us to start to feel that overwhelming feeling, like it's too much on our shoulders. It's easy to make us want to run and hide and not even try. But let me tell you all a secret here. This you is a y'all, all right? Or for my good Northerners, you guys, all right? Jesus is talking about us collectively together. The good news is being the light of the world is a group project. Yes, all of us have something to contribute. All of us reflect something of God's goodness to the world around us. But how it is that we as the light, we as those who reflect the light of Jesus, how we are able to connect in community with one another, how we're able to be in concert and cooperate with one another is what makes us stand out in the universe. It's very interesting because we live in this time where it is possible for us to have more relationships with people than ever, right? Like we can have this great web of relationships because of technology and social media. But all the research that's coming out, like all the polling that they do of people, it's telling us that people, despite all of that, are feeling lonelier than ever. And so why is that? Well, because it turns out that many of these connections that we're building are kind of counterfeit. You know, they might feel authentic, they might like look good on the outside, but they're not the real thing. And so they tend to quickly fall apart when things get difficult. It makes me think about, you know, how sometimes when you're out in cities, and then it eventually makes their ways to like little small towns like Powderly, even, I don't know how, but you know, like Oakleys, or Folkleys, as we call them back in the day, or like Coach purses or whatever, like you can see some pretty good looking counterfeits, right? You might pick one up somewhere, one might be passed off to you, and like it can look pretty great for a while, but I think how we're able to recognize that it isn't really the real thing is as those Folkleys fall apart under any kind of pressure, right? Or how that purse has a strap snap off pretty quickly. And the same is true in these kinds of relationships. You know, relationships that are built kind of on surface level conversations as we go to the grocery store or talk to our neighbors or interact with people at work. Relationships that are built on kind of the highlight reel that we share on social media, on likes and shares. Those kinds of relationships easily disintegrate when there's any kind of conflict, when there's any kind of disagreement. And those kinds of relationships, they don't provide the depth of connection that we need whenever we literally need a shoulder to cry on, or when we find ourselves facing something too big for us that we can't possibly handle by ourselves. I've heard some people describe what we often experience today as artificial intimacy. It mimics, but it lacks the substance and the benefit of the real thing. If you think about it, we have a whole lot of artificial light as well, right? Like we're sitting under artificial light in this very moment. And if you go to a city, it's like the city never sleeps because there's artificial light everywhere to light it up. This is Los Angeles at night. You know, you've got your streets signs, you've got your billboards, you've got your building lights, you've got lights everywhere. So there's just this glow that always surrounds the city. But in 1994, there was an earthquake. Whenever this earthquake happened, it caused almost a complete blackout in the whole city. There was no artificial light available to them. And so as people woke up in the middle of the night and began stumbling outside, they were in awe and wonder. They were like in complete shock at what they saw. So much so that people began to call 911. They started to report this mysterious cloud that was floating overhead, this ghostly light. And if you're my husband, you instantly go to UFOs. Like, LA must be like, look at him rolling his eyes. You know it's true. It's not Bigfoot in this situation. It has to be UFOs. It's UFOs that have come to invade LA. Or maybe it's like there's some gas that has been released and is now like hanging overhead. But do you all know what it was? Yeah, it was the band of the Milky Way that they'd never seen before. Because what artificial light does is it crowds that out. It blocks that. It pollutes the air in a way that you can't see what's always really there, right? And likewise, you know, there's all this artificial intimacy in our lives that pollutes our relationships with one another. But when people get a glimpse of the real thing, like they're in awe and wonder. When they see people who are deeply connected, when they see people who are deeply committed to one another, especially when they come from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of different experiences, when they have different opinions and perspectives, yet they're somehow held together by their love for God and their love for one another, they're like, what is that? Like, how do you get to be a part of what that looks like? It draws people in. And so Jesus, he says to us, you guys together are the light of the world. Like how we relate to one another matters. It shines. But there's more for us to glean from this statement. Jesus, he goes on and he says, you are light. This is not a conditional statement, right? He doesn't say, if you X, Y, and Z, then you will be light. No, he makes a statement of fact. He says, you exist as light. We might not recognize it. We might try to cover it up in all kinds of different ways. But the truth of the matter remains the same and cannot be changed. We are light. According to not just anybody saying that about us, but according to the one who made us and gave us our purpose in life. This can be hard for us to get our heads around a lot of times because we tend to think that we behave our way into who we become. You know, if I just work hard enough and long enough at whatever it is, then I will arrive at this identity. When I do all of these good things and I stop doing all these bad things, then I will be light. However, in reality, what we know is that in all actuality, it starts with belief. When a person believes in a particular aspect of their identity, then they begin to behave. Then they begin to act in alignment with that belief. People who consider themselves voters, for example, are more likely to actually vote than people who say that voting is an action that they hope to engage in. Or people who consider themselves to be runners are more likely to actually run than people who say that it's a habit that they hope that they pick up. Whether it's a conscious choice or not, what we do is an indication of who we believe that we are. Behavior follows belief. Our identity is shaped from the inside out, not the other way around. And so what if we dare to believe what Jesus says about us? What if we dare to believe that we are light? How might that belief shape the way that we move through this world and the way that we interact with others if we truly trusted that God has given us something good to offer? Jesus says, you are, and then finally, the light of the world. To the first group of people who were gathered around Jesus hearing this was not new news, okay? We read it, we might think that this was some revolutionary thing that Jesus was speaking to them. But in reality, God had already called the people of Israel to be a light to the nations, to be the light of the world. The goal had always been for them to be a group of people in the world that stood out. A group of people in the world that was a beacon of hope that showed everyone what was possible when you lived a part of a community that had God at the center. However, it seems that they had become a city on a hill that had tried to hide itself, which is impossible, y'all. Or another way to look at it, they had been a lamp that had been lit, and then they tried to put a bowl over the top of it. They had become comfortable just kind of enjoying the warmth and the beauty of the light all to themselves. In fact, they had questions about whether or not other people could be a part of the light and what hoops they might need to jump through so that they could indeed be included in. And we in the church, we can get into those same kind of patterns, right? We can get caught up in the same thing, trying to decide who can be included. But in this moment, what Jesus is doing is he is reminding them and us what their true purpose is. He's saying, you are light, not for yourselves, but for others. Light by its very nature is not so much like what we can see, right? But rather that by which we see everything else clearly. And so our purpose is to reflect God's goodness in the world so that others can clearly see that our God is at work all the time, everywhere. And so that others can begin to see that they too are light and live out their purpose in their lives. I saw a neat story the other day about a woman who lived in France. I think she was in her 80s. She lived in the same house for a long time. And y'all know what happens when you live in one place for a while, right? You accumulate a lot of stuff. And so it was time to move her, and her kids were like, we're not taking just anything. We're not moving at all, right? Some of the stuff's going to the dump. And so they didn't want to throw away anything that was of value, though. So they called in an auctioneer to help them recognize what they should actually keep amongst all this stuff. And as soon as this woman walks in, this auctioneer, like her eyes immediately see something and her jaw drops. This is what she sees. This work of art hanging up over this woman's hot plate in her kitchen, okay, of all places. But what this auctioneer knows is that this is a work of art by a very famous artist who only made 11 of these pieces of art on wood, and they had no idea where some of them were. And here it was above the hot plate, right? Worth something like $4 to $6.6 million. This beautiful piece of art that only this one woman and the people who happened to stumble into her kitchen had gotten to enjoy. All this time, she had not realized the value of what she had that could have been enjoyed by so many others. What about us? You know, we might not recognize it, but God has placed something of immense value in us, His light. And so let's not keep it to ourselves. Let's not keep it safe in our kitchens, okay? This light was placed in us to be seen and to be shared and to be enjoyed by others. You are the light of the world. And so let's refuse to be indifferent about these red words of Jesus. Let's not get all overwhelmed thinking we have to do it by ourselves, but rather rest in the fact that we get to do this together. Let's not get caught up thinking there's not enough to go around, but instead trust that there's enough light for everyone. Let's not feel defeated, thinking that we aren't good enough, but instead rejoice in the fact that Jesus has included us not based on our own merits, but just because He loves us. And let's live into this identity that our Maker has given us. May we put our light on a stand so they can give light to the whole house. May we let our good deeds shine before others so that they may give praise to our Father in heaven.